All right, today we are diving into a theory of crime that's incredibly direct, often controversial, and hugely influential. It's called right realism, and it offers its own take on one of the oldest questions in society. And here it is, the big one. Why do people commit crime? This is a question that has kept people busy for centuries. But right realism? It really doesn't get tangled up in all the complex explanations. In fact, right realism just cuts right through the noise with a really simple, powerful answer. At its core, the theory argues that crime isn't really the result of things like poverty or social inequality. Nope, it's a conscious, deliberate choice.
Okay, so if crime is a choice, what does that calculation actually look like in someone's head? Let's try to get inside the mind of a potential offender for a minute.
Well, it all comes from something called rational choice theory. And the main idea here is that we all have free will. We're not just, puppets being controlled by our circumstances. We're seen as rational actors, making decisions that we think will benefit us the most.
And this is where the whole idea of a criminal act gets, reframed. It's not seen as some moment of madness or desperation. It's viewed as a cold calculation. According to this theory, a person thinking about committing a crime is basically running a cost-benefit analysis in their head.
So, on one side of their mental scale, you've got the risks. What are the chances I get caught? And if I do, how bad is the punishment? But on the other side, you've got the rewards. Money, stuff, maybe even status. Right realists argue that crime is so high because for a lot of people, the potential reward just seems to outweigh the risk of getting caught. But look, just making the rational choice to do something, that's only half the story, right? You also need the perfect chance to actually do it. And that is the next piece of this puzzle. This brings us to something called routine activities theory, which was developed way back in 1979 by two guys named Cohen and Felsen. And what they argued was that crime isn't random. It happens when a very specific set of conditions all line up perfectly in our day-to-day lives. So what are these three conditions? Well, first, you need a motivated offender. That's the person who's already made that rational choice we just talked about. Second, you need a suitable target. An unlocked car, an empty house, you get the idea. And third, and this is so important, there has to be no capable guardian around. No cop on the beat, no neighbor watching from their window, just nobody there to stop them.
So the big takeaway here is that crime is, at its heart, opportunistic. It's not just about who the criminal is. It's about when and where they find that perfect moment where all three of those things come together.
But that makes you wonder, right? If you take away the opportunity, let's say you install more security cameras or people get better locks, does that mean crime just goes away?
Well, not necessarily. This is where we run into the problem of displacement. The idea here is that because criminals are rational, they don't just give up. They just shift their focus. The crime doesn't disappear, it just gets moved to an easier, softer target, maybe down the block or in the next town over. Okay, so we've talked about individual choice, and we've talked about opportunity. Now we're going to zoom out a little and look at a much more controversial society-level argument that some right realists put forward. And this is the underclass theory. It's most famously linked to the political scientist Charles Murray. Now, his argument connects a rise in crime to what he describes as a specific part of society that, in his view, is failing to properly teach its children mainstream values like self-control and respect for the law.
And this quote right here really gets to the heart of his claim. Murray draws a straight line from what he calls welfare dependency to the growth of this underclass, arguing that it breaks down the traditional family structure he sees as essential for raising kids properly. So let's just break down his logic here. He argues that generous welfare benefits can accidentally weaken the nuclear family, making fathers feel like they aren't needed financially. In his view, this leads to a generation of boys growing up without a father's discipline or a positive male role model. The result, he claims, is poor socialization, which then leads young men to look for status and role models on the street, often through crime. So let's shift gears now from social structures to the actual physical environment. How can the way a neighborhood looks and feels actually impact crime rates? This leads us to a really famous idea. It's called the broken windows theory. It came from an article by James Q. Wilson and George Kelling back in 1982. And the core idea is so powerful. It suggests that visible signs of neglect, even something as small as a single broken window that doesn't get fixed, can kick off a chain reaction that leads to much more serious crime. And of course, broken windows is really just a metaphor for all the little signs that a community is losing control. We're talking about stuff like graffiti, vandalism, trash everywhere, constant noise, all the little things that suggest the normal rules of society have broken down.
So why does that matter? Well, because when these things are left unchecked, they send a very powerful signal. To residents, it says, this place is unsafe. And to potential offenders, it's like a giant flashing sign that says, nobody's in charge here, no one cares what you do.
And once that signal is out there, the theory says the area becomes a magnet for more and more crime. People who can afford to leave do. And the neighborhood gets trapped in this vicious spiral, where disorder leads to crime, and that crime leads to even more fear and disorder. So we have covered 4 pretty distinct ideas here: rational choice, routine activities, the underclass, and broken windows. So how do they all fit together to create the full, right realist view on crime? Let's connect the dots. It all starts at the micro level, with an individual making a rational choice. Then that choice needs an opportunity to become a reality. And those opportunities are way more likely to pop up in an area that's full of broken windows. Finally, for some of these thinkers like Murray, that decay is just a symptom of a deeper social problem, which he calls the underclass. And really, that's what this all leads to. If you accept this framework, that crime is ultimately about choice and opportunity, all shaped by our environment and how we're raised, it leaves us with a huge question. Where should we, as a society, focus our efforts to stop crime? Do we punish the individual's choice? Do we try to eliminate the opportunity? Or do we start by fixing the broken windows?